Hello, friends, and greetings from the city of Kee-tah-kew-shoo, which has the sunflower as one of its emblems. So it's quite appropriate that I've got all these sunflowers behind me. All right. So today I want to continue on with what I was reading yesterday. So let me just share the, there we are, the Hakluyt Society, The Voyage of Captain John Saris to Japan, second series, number 5. Now, this time I'm going to use a PDF, not the Kindle, so it's a bit more stable, I think, as far as actual reading is concerned. And also, this is rather better than in the Kindle that I had. This image of Ieyasu. Let's see. The Shogun Ieyasu. Yeah, it's a much better definition than the one that I showed you yesterday. So that's a step forward. Now let's keep going. We've done that page. We've done that page. And we've read this. Keep going. Whoops. We've read that. And we've read the preface. We also read the part of the introduction, just a few pages of it. Trying to think where exactly we read to, but I think what I'm going to do is start from the introduction, which is by Sir Ernest himself. We'll just check that one more time, that it is by Sir Ernest. There we are, introduction. So the manuscript and its history is part 1 of the introduction. And yes, all this part, the introduction from 1 to 11, is Sir Ernest himself, Sir Ernest Satow. So let's do it. I'm going to make it larger. All right, here we go. Introduction, the manuscript and its history. The present volume contains Saris's original journal of his voyage from Bantam to Japan in 1613 and of his stay in that country, printed from the manuscript in the India Office records. To this have been added from Purchas Cox's narrative of the events at Hirado during Saris's absence on his journey to court, some extracts from Purchas's version of the journal which do not appear in the manuscript, the abridged account of the homeward voyage of the Clove, and a trade report drawn up by Saris during his residence at Bantam, Indonesia, in 1605 to 1609. Also, from the India Office records, a letter written by him at the Cape and his report addressed to the East India Company from Plymouth on his return. The journal preserved at the India Office, Marine Records number 14, is a volume of 135 folios, well written, and containing in the earlier portion rough sketches in a green wash of portions of the African coast. These are on sheets inserted between the leaves of the diary, and it is possible that there were more of them and that the rest have been lost. It is, however, more likely that, as the diary itself was not finished, the later sketches were also omitted. It is in Saris's own hand, as is proved by a comparison with letters of his in the India Office, but that is not the original rough. That it is not the original rough log seems to be certain for the following reasons. 1, it is unfinished, breaking off in the middle of a page with no apparent reason. 2, it omits many particulars given by Purchas in his printed version, which was taken, he says, from the navigator's own journal. Some of these may, of course, be amplifications by Saris, who was evidently in communication with Purchas when the latter was preparing his work, but others appear to be certainly from the original log. 3, it is very uniformly written, apparently at leisure. The writer has had time to print many words in Old English characters. 4, in some cases, words are placed in brackets, as though to supply defects in the original. For example, I appointed the boatswain to see that all watched except, etc. That and watched placed in brackets. There is no indication that this copy was ever in the archives of the East India Company, who would, of course, have received either the original log or a complete copy. At present, its history cannot be traced further back than about the middle of the present century, when it was in the possession of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Best Jervis, whose bookplate still adorns the volume. After his return from India, that able and public-spirited officer formed a scheme for printing at his own private press a series of valuable publications on the geography and statistics of Asia, translated from various languages and containing the most important records of travellers to new regions. Life of Thomas Best Jervis by his son, the Cavaliere W.P. Jervis, London, 1898. The project was given up after the issue of the first volume, but it seems probable that Colonel Jervis had intended to include Saris's log in the series and had purchased the present copy with that end in view. The Cavaliere Jervis has been kind enough to go through his father's papers in the hope of learning how he became possessed of the journal, but unfortunately, nothing has been found relating to it. By 1877, when Sir Clements Markham drew attention to it in his preface to the Voyages of Sir James Lancaster, page 12, the log had found its way to the topographical depot of the War Office. There are two accounts of how it got there. Sir C. Markham, lxxxiii, states that it was bought by the depot from Mr. Kerslake, a Bristol bookseller. But Mr. Danvers, preface to the list of the India Office Marine Records, says that it was purchased by the War Office in 1857 for 26L, that would be livres, pounds, I think, from the executors of the late Colonel Jervis. And this is probably correct. The later history is clear. Sir Clements Markham's note having called attention to the matter, the Secretary of State for War, the Right Honourable E. Stanhope, MP, in August 1889 ordered the journal to be transferred to the India Office in order to make as complete as possible the collection there preserved of the logs of the East India Company's early voyages. And there is a footnote, number 1 here, which says, transcribed from a memorandum furnished by Mr. William Foster. 2. How the East India Company came to think of trading to Japan. It has been stated that it was the receipt of letters from William Adams that gave the first impulse in England to an attempt to establish commercial relations with Japan. This is, however, not correct. Already in 1580, Jackman and Pett, two sea captains in the employ of the Muscovy Company, started on a voyage to discover the Northeast Passage. Jackman and Pett, Calendar of State Papers, East Indies, Volume 1, page 61. Jackman and Pett started on a voyage to discover the Northeast Passage, their instructions being, after reaching Quinzhé Haven, that's Hangzhou, the chief city in northern China, to take an opportunity to sail over to Japan, where Christian men, Jesuits of many countries of Christendom, and perhaps some Englishmen would be found. The East India Company's charter is dated the last day of 1600, and in April 1602 there was an agreement made between the company and one George Weymouth, mariner, for a voyage by the Northwest Passage to Cathay, China, or Japan. This quest of a Northwest Passage, though always unsuccessful, was not readily abandoned and endured down to our own times when it was finally attained, but proved to be subject to so many difficulties as to be practically valueless. At the same time, however, the newborn spirit of enterprise was not to be daunted, and after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the English were less than ever disposed to admit the Spanish and Portuguese claims to divide the newly discovered Asiatic and American regions between them. Whilst pursuing the will-o'-the-wisp of a passage round the north of the European and American continents, they commenced trading to the Indies on their own account by more direct routes that lay to the south. In 1577, Drake sailed through the Straits of Magellan, crossed over from the west coast of North America to the Moluccas, and thence returned home round the Cape of Good Hope. That's South Africa, isn't it? In 1582, 4 vessels under Edward Fenton started for the East Indies by way of the Cape or through the Straits of Magellan, as might be found most convenient. They returned after reaching the coast of Brazil. 9 years later, 3 ships, one of them commanded by Captain, afterwards Sir James Lancaster, sailed by the Cape route with a view to preying on Portuguese commerce in the East Indies. One of his vessels had to be sent back from the Cape, a second foundered at sea, and the third, after with much difficulty reaching the West Indies on her homeward voyage, was there lost. Another expedition, consisting likewise of 3 ships, started forth in 1596, but not a soul returned. Lancaster commanded a third expedition, which sailed in February 1601 and returned in September 1603, having got as far as Bantam in Java, Indonesia. The port of Bantam, that is. Also known for the Bantam chickens, which were found there by sailors. In June 1604, a license was granted to Sir Edward Michelborne and others to discover the countries of Kathaya, China, Japan, Korea, and Kambaya. I'm sorry, don't know. With him as pilot sailed the famous navigator John Davis, who was killed in a desperate fight with Japanese pirates off the coast of the Malay Peninsula. An interesting description of this affair is given at pages 178 to 182 of the Voyages and Works of John Davis, edited by Admiral Albert H. Markham, Hakluyt Society, 1880. Henry Middleton commanded the squadron sent on the second voyage, 1604, of the East India Company, with instructions to proceed as far as the Moluccas, but there was no mention of Japan in his commission. It will be seen further on that the first English navigator who reached Japan was William Adams, who had gone out as chief pilot of a Dutch squadron and was cast away there in 1600. 2 of his companions, Quekonek and von Santvoort, were enabled to leave Japan in 1605, and we cannot but believe that Adams seized this opportunity to send letters to England, though none is extant that can with any certainty be ascribed to that period. Professor Rees conjectures, indeed, that the fragment of a letter to his wife without date, printed at page 33 of the Memorials of Japan, may have been written on this occasion. In Adams's letter of October the 22nd, 1611, he says, "As yet I think no certain news is known whether I be living or dead, but somehow or other it had become known that Adams was in Japan, for in his letter of January the 12th, 1613, addressed to Spalding at Bantam, he says letters had been sent him by his wife and other good friends out of England, of which he had received 2 that came from London by the Globe, of the 7th voyage, sailed January the 3rd, 1611, written by Sir Thomas Smythe and his friend John Stockle." These letters, though the seals had not been broken, had been kept 6 or 7 weeks from him, in accordance with the policy of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, which forbade the transmission of private letters by their ships. From the commission of Saris, dated April 4th, 1611, it will be seen that Adams was known to be resident in Japan and in great favour with its ruler. It is possible, too, that Adams might have got letters home through the Spaniards or Portuguese, to whom he says in his first extant letter he had rendered useful services. It is clear, however, that the project of opening up trade with Japan did not originate in any suggestion of Adams, but dated from a considerably earlier period even than his arrival off the coast of Bungo in Kyushu in 1600. It should be mentioned that in the company's instructions for the 7th voyage, the principals of the latter were directed to take the opportunity from the most convenient place you shall arrive at, to send 1 or 2 of our factors in such convenient shipping as you may procure, to carry his Majesty's letters unto the King of Japan, together with such stock of merchandise and commodities as we have appointed our said principal merchants to provide for that purpose. First Letter Book, page 387. The letter thus sent to the King of Japan is given at page 426 of that volume, but of course it was never presented. King of Japan in inverted commas, of course. It will be seen that the memorandum containing Saris's observations on the trade of Japan, printed as an appendix to the present volume, was compiled by him during his residence at Bantam. In the course of it, he speaks of this year 1608. And there can be little doubt that his assumed knowledge of the Japanese trade furnished the main motive for appointing him to the command of a voyage which was to embrace that country in its scope. It may seem strange that he makes no mention in this memorandum of Adams, or of information received from him, but the probable explanation is that Adams had not written to Bantam. As there had been a factory there for several years, it seems curious that he should be ignorant of the fact, yet From his letter of October the 22nd, 1611, he appears to have heard but recently that certain English merchants lie in the island of Java or Java. Factory, by the way, is not the kind of factory that we understand nowadays. This would be a trading outpost. Okay, number 3 coming up. 3. Saris's previous career and his instructions for the voyage. The greater part of this section has been furnished by Mr. Foster. According to the inscription upon his tombstone, John Saris was born in the year 1579 or 1580. He came of a Yorkshire family, his great-grandfather, Humphrey Saris, being described as of Tickle, i.e. Tickhill, an ancient town situated near Doncaster. The family arms, still to be traced on the seals attached to 5 of John Saris's letters, now in the India office, were a chevron between 3 Saracens' heads cooped at the neck. Yes, presumably a punning allusion to the name Saris, I suppose, yes. There are several Saris pedigrees among the Harleian manuscripts in the British Museum. Number 1463, F38B, number 1551, F101, number 4964, F101, number 6164, F46. I think F there is folio. And from these, the following genealogical table has been compiled. And then we have this table. Hard to explain this. But anyway, Humphrey, and he seems to have had a son, Edmund, buried at Horsham in Sussex, who married Joan, daughter of Day of Tickle, County York. And then Thomas of London, buried 1588 in St Andrew Undershaft, who married Catherine, daughter of Edward Lovell. And they had children as follows: Joan Rush, who married Richard of London, Henry of Sussex, and John Saris, that would be. He married twice, Thomas of London. So he then married Catherine, daughter of Henry Cheval Draper, and had 2 sons, George and Richard. And Thomas of London had a brother, John of Sandwich, and Joan, a sister, Joan, who married Edmund Lane of London. All right, so that's what the information says. I've had to read it out, which is possibly not ideal, but there we are. Can't be helped. If you could see this page, of course, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It will be seen that Saris was the younger son by his first marriage of a London citizen who died while John was still a child. In these circumstances, it was natural that soon after coming of age, he should seek his fortune in the East. Of his introduction to the newly founded East India Company, we have no account, as the court minutes for that period are missing. We know, however, that he took part in the second voyage under Captain, afterwards Sir Henry Middleton. The fleet sailed from Gravesend, March 25th, 1604, and reached Bantam on December the 23rd. Here it divided, the Hector and Susan remaining at Bantam. Another reading, by the way, is Bun-10, I think. Anyway, Bantam to load pepper, while Middleton with the Dragon and Ascension proceeded to the Moluccas, returning on July the 24th, 1605. Whether Saris accompanied him thither or spent the interval at Bantam is not known, but probably the latter was the case. At any rate, when Middleton sailed for England in October 1605, Saris remained at Bantam among other factors, under Gabriel Towerson, his pay being £3, 6 shillings and 8 pence a month, or £40 a year. His name does not often occur in the records of the time. He is once mentioned as Master Saris Merchant, who received a cut on the forefinger with a sable in a brawl with the Dutch. A letter of his to the company, dated Bantam, December the 4th, 1608, gives some particulars about the goods which he recommended should be sent out from England, and mentions several previous letters, especially one of July the 14th, 1608, but none of these is extant. It was during this time that he compiled a diary of events and other papers, of which the most interesting, on the trade of the Far East, is given at the end of this volume. He gradually rose to be chief factor. Factor is a accountant, perhaps, or a clerk of some sort. chief factor, having, it would seem, succeeded to that post when Towerson went home in the Dragon on December 23rd, 1608. By this time, no doubt, Saris was beginning to feel the need of a respite from his labours, and on October the 4th, 1609, he handed over charge to Augustine Spalding and sailed for England in the Hector, arriving in the Downs May 10th, 1610. The volume containing the court minutes of the East India Company from the beginning of 1610 to the end of 1613 are missing, and nothing is known as to what took place on his return or of the details of his appointment to command the next year's fleet. As already mentioned, his long residence at Bantam and the diligence shown by him in collecting useful information doubtless had their part in determining the choice of the directors. It is probable also that he had urged the desirability of attempting to open up trade with Japan. Information about that country he had no doubt been able to obtain from Dutch acquaintances derived from Melchor van Zandvoort, who had been backwards and forwards more than once between Japan and Patani, though he could not have known the result of the Dutch expedition which had been dispatched to Japan from Johore in May 1609. That's Johore in India, I think. Yeah. The following is an abstract of Saris's commission from the company dated April the 4th, 1611. April 4th, 1611, a commission set down by us, the governor, deputy and committees for the merchants of London trading to the East Indies for better direction of our loving friends, John Saris, captain and chief commander, and Gabriel Towerson, captain of the Hector, our principal and chief merchants, and others, the merchants, masters and mariners, in this our intended 8th voyage to the East Indies, which we humbly beseech Almighty God to prosper with a happy conclusion. Interesting. The spelling is rather different to modern spelling, but I think you can generally get the sense quite well. Number 1, having prepared 3 ships for a voyage to the East Indies, viz. the Clove, James Foster, master; the Hector, Thomas Fuller, master; the Thomas, Richard Dawes, master. John Saris, gentleman, is appointed chief captain and commander to go in the Clove and to command all our said ships and the men in them, not doubting but that he will so behave himself in his charge as he may be both feared and loved, and that he will with all his diligence and endeavours prosecute our designs and labour to bring this costly voyage to a happy end. 2. Gabriel Towerson to be captain of the Hector and men, and Tempest Peacock to be chief merchant in the Thomas. 3. Prayers to be said morning and evening. The purser of each ship has been furnished with a Bible, containing also the Book of Common Prayer for this purpose. 4. Blasphemy, swearing, theft, drunkenness, and other disorders will be severely punished, gaming to be strictly forbidden. 5. The ships to be kept clean and sweet. 6. Provisions to be husbanded and strictly accounted for. 7. 2 councils appointed. A. For special occasions of trade and merchandising, Saris, Towerson, Peacock, Cox, Ambrose, Armway, Richard Wickham, Edward Camden, and George Ball. B. For seafaring causes, Saris, Towerson, the 3 masters, and their mates. 8. Instructions to be framed for the ships keeping company and a rendezvous appointed in case of separation. 9. Continual and true journals to be kept, not only by the captains but by the merchants, pursers, masters, and masters' mates, and these to be compared once or twice a week, so as a perfect discourse may be set down to be presented to the governor and company, when God shall grant them a safe return, to be kept for better direction of posterity. 10. When watering, care to be taken that the men do not injure or wrong the natives, also that they do not surfeit themselves in eating of fruits and fresh victuals. Special care to be taken to relieve the sick. 11. Men to be warned not to straggle from their companions at the watering places. 12. Order to be taken concerning the goods of any men dying in the voyage. No man to be allowed to bring more goods aboard than his chest will hold, and all these to be entered in the purser's books on pain of confiscation. 13. Water casks to be filled with seawater when emptied of fresh to prevent leakage and mustines. Mustines. Well, Number 14, the shoals of Judea, Basasta, India, between Africa and Madagascar are to be avoided. 15, whether to refresh at Saldania, Table Bay, or at St. Augustine, Madagascar, is left to their discretion, but not to endanger their arrival at the bar of Surat by the end of September, which is the main and principal scope of this our voyage. Wherever they water, they should stay as short a time as possible in order to have time to call at Socotra to refresh themselves and to buy 4 tons of aloes. 16. At Socotra, it is hoped they will meet with some Guzats, from whom they will learn whether William Hawkins and the other factors left at Surat are living, as also of the state of Sir Henry Middleton and of those ships that went with him, and in what state our business there standeth, whereby you may the better there govern yourselves for performance of our desires. But if the time of the monsoon be so far spent that you cannot arrive at the bar of Surat by the end of September or middle of October next, at the farthest, then we will you to take the first opportunity either to sail to Aden or Mocha, alias Mochoe, within the mouth of the Red Sea, about some 10 leagues distant from Aden, as we understand. At which port of Mocha we have heard that one of the ships in the 4th voyage hath traded, and where we doubt not you may sell cloth, lead, iron, tin, quicksilver, for money or gold, for that we think commodities will be too dear in that place, considering our purpose that you go to Surat, except you may buy cloves, maces, or nutmegs at a reasonable rate, which are said to be good commodities at Surat as well as here in England. I'm going to pause briefly to let my cat out of the room. Go on, out then. Go on. Sorry, okay. One of those things. When the cat wants to go out, it has to go out. Right, where were we? Trying to see where we were. I think we got as far as here in England, near the bottom of the page there. Okay, right. So in this place, you must spend the time till opportunity do serve to go to Surat, which will not be till towards the end of August following, so as you may arrive there by the end of September, which we pray you to endeavour by all possible means. But staying at Aden or Mocha, have especial care that your men give no offence to the people there, still keeping good watch and standing upon your guard, and that out of any danger of any castle, fort, or galleys to prevent mischief. 17 and 18, special instructions for Surat. 19. If sufficient goods can be obtained at Surat to lade all 3 ships, we will you to take that opportunity to freight them all and let them be returned as aforesaid. If only 2 can be laden, then the Hector and Thomas are to be sent home under Towerson. List of goods to be purchased at Surat, calicos, etc., suitable for Priaman, Bantam, Banda, and the Moluccas to be bought and shipped for those places. 20. Instructions as to goods to be sold and bought at Priaman. In performance of this business, remember still your purpose to go for Bantam and Banda, that you slip not the opportunity of the monsoon. 21. At Banda, to purchase nutmegs and mace. A voyage may also be made to the Moluccas to purchase cloves, while nutmegs, etc. are being provided. Then to leave some factors and stock at Banda, and return to Bantam and lade the goods provided, and then in God's name, with all due speed, to return for England. If repulsed at Surat or trade found unsuitable, then the ships are to go to the Red Sea, if not visited already on the way. Any vessels not laden there may be sent to Priaman, etc., as already mentioned. 22. Finding fail of trade at Surat, the Guzarats should be invited to bring their goods to Socotra. Guzarats? Gujarati? I don't know. A factory may be left at Mocha or some other place in the Red Sea if thought expedient. If the ships are forced all to go on to Bantam, then the Hector and Thomas are to be laden there and sent home under Towerson as aforesaid. In the search of which trade, an island near Celebres named Makassar is recommended to their notice, as rice bought there may be carried to Banda, and will yield 3 for 1 to be invested in nutmegs and mace. I think I'm going to need a map with all these names on it. 23. Item. The Hector and Thomas being freighted and sent for England, then we wish you, Captain John Saris, to proceed with the Clove with all possible speed, that you may endeavour your course for Japan, having before at Bantam or elsewhere diligently advised, inquired, and conferred with our factors, or any other the best means you may attain unto the knowledge whereby to inform yourself for or concerning our intended voyage to Japan, and to procure in any of those parts, if you may, some skilful pilot experienced in those coasts, and take him along with you, directing your course from thence to Japan, neglecting no time, but taking the benefit and advantage of those winds and monsoons, as you shall most certainly and truly inform yourselves, and learn that they blow in their seasons. Everywhere they are to inquire for safe harbours and places of trade, and invite merchants thither, especially to Socotra, as already mentioned. 24. Item. And being arrived at Japan, we desire you to use the best means to search out the most convenient and safest harbour to trade in, where you may sell cloth, lead, iron, and such other of our native commodities as by your observation you shall find most vendible there, most easily sold, wherein you are to be very specially careful, both what colours and sorts of cloth, and for what quantities will there be sold, as also to give great charge that your men offer no offence to the people there, still keeping good watch and standing upon your guard, and that out of the danger of any castle, fort, or other galleys or frigates, to prevent any mischief that may happen, and to consult and take good advice with the rest of the factors, and especially with William Adams, an Englishman now resident there and in great favour with the king, as we hear, to desire his opinion what course should be held, both for the delivery of his Majesty's letters now sent, what presents are to be given, to whom, by whom, and in what manner the same is to be done, with all diligence that shall be requisite, observing carefully the times, in keeping the monsoons in all places where you shall trade, for attaining to other ports as occasion shall be offered. And for presents we have sent with you as appeareth in the invoice. 25. Item. And as you shall receive encouragement in the progress of your affairs by the persuasion of the aforesaid William Adams, grounded upon his long experience in those parts, and shall find that it may be with safety, as being protected under the authority of the king of the country, and may prove commodious and beneficial for the good of the company, then, with the counsel of Richard Cox and such principal men as are in your ship, you may advise, resolve, and leave such factors as you in your discretion shall think fit, with such a quantity of goods as shall be by you thought convenient for the settling of a factory and maintaining of a trade at Japan, together with so many and such sufficient mariners to attend them and guard our said goods as you shall find to be needful and necessary, and to provide them a good and strong house for the better safety of such goods as shall be left there in charge with them. But if you shall find at Japan no convenient means of venting our commodities, or the return of profit not to answer the length and difficulty of the voyage, or the dangers in prosecuting this trade to exceed without proportion the advantage to be hoped, then you shall frame your course and seek vent for such commodities as you have either at the Moluccas, Filipinas, or any other place thereabouts, whether you may be encouraged by any probable hopes of peaceable and profitable trading. And if at your departure from Japan, the said William Adams shall importune you to transport him into his native country, England, to visit his wife and children, we pray you then to accommodate him with as convenient a cabin as you may, and all other necessaries which your ship may afford him. Yeah, vent is sale, isn't it? Seek vent for such commodities. Seek sale. Seek to sell. 26. Strict accounts to be kept of goods bought and sold, etc. 27. Item. For that voyages of this condition and charge cannot admit any private trade, but whatsoever is achieved by this general and great charge should be applied to the benefit of the whole company. Therefore, we set it down as an absolute order that no man, neither captains, merchants, masters, or mariners, or any other person or persons whatsoever, in these our ships, do trade or deal with any merchandise whatsoever which we shall provide for our return, or any other sort of merchandise more than will be contained within his proportioned chest of allowance for this voyage, and the same to be registered in the purser's book, to the end that if any person die upon the voyage, their friends and executors, may know what they had, and take notice what is become of the same, holding it most unreasonable that those that live by our employment should deal with the commodities which we labour to get, to produce means for payment of their wages and defraying of the charges of this our great and costly voyage. So, no private profit taking, I suppose. 28. Any person succeeding to higher office is not to have increased wages, but to be referred to the company to be rewarded at their return as they shall be found to have deserved. No factors, masters, mates, etc. may be removed except by order of a council. 29. Cabins not to be altered or enlarged unless for cargo purposes. 30. Watch to be kept lest pirates surprise the ships. 31. Unnecessary expense of shooting ordnance at drinking of healths or on the captains or Cape merchants going ashore, strictly forbidden. 32. If Saris dies, Towson is to take his place if present. If Towson is not available, Cox is to succeed. If neither be there, then a box number 1 delivered to Saris is to be opened, and the name of the person who is to be appointed will be found therein. 33. No private persons to be carried in the ships. 34. Any fair birds or beasts or any other rare thing fit for us to present to his majesty or any of the noble lords that are our honourable friends are to be carefully kept for this purpose. 35. To observe fit seasons for sailing, and if possible to reach England on the return voyage in May or June. 36. Although instructions have been given for trade at Surat, etc., yet it is left to the discretion of the captain and his council to vary the course if good reason be found. 37. If deemed desirable on reaching India, the ships may go to Goga on the Gulf of Cambay instead of Surat. 38. Stores to be carefully accounted for. 39. To prevent private trade, factors, etc., are only to be paid so much of their salaries as shall be necessary to provide apparel, and that at the rate of 5 shillings the real of 8, leaving the rest to be paid in England. 40. Ships not to touch outwards or homewards at Falmouth, Plymouth, or Dartmouth, except in case of great necessity. 41. For the better comfort and recreation of the factors resident in the Indies, the company has sent the works of that worthy servant of Christ, Mr. William Perkins, to instruct their minds and feed their souls with that heavenly food of the knowledge of the truth of God's word, and the Book of Martyrs in 2 volumes, as also Mr. Hakluyt's Voyages to recreate their spirits with variety of history. These works are to be left at the principal factory, where we require that they should have especial care to sanctify the Sabbath day, and to read upon those divine books for the instruction and comfort of all those that shall be there remaining. 42. In case of shipwreck, care should be taken to land the money, or, if this is not possible, to buoy it in the sea till it can be recovered. 43. Invoices of ships' cargoes to be sent by other ships, as also particulars of goods left at Bantam. Okay, that's the end of the long quotation. It is clear from this commission that Saris was not sent mainly to open up trade with Japan. That was quite a secondary object. His first business was to go to Surat in order to follow up Middleton, who, the company hoped, had settled English trade at that port, and if sufficient lading could be obtained there, all 3 ships were to return direct to England. If he could not reach Surat that year, Saris was to fill in time by an experimental voyage to Mocha. As we know, this was what happened, but the intended voyage to Surat the following monsoon was, of course, rendered out of the question by Middleton's hostile reception there, and the measures taken by him and Saris to retaliate on the Indian traders in the Red Sea. The commission is rather carelessly drawn. Much of it is copied with slight alterations from the commissions issued for previous voyages. Saris was also provided with 2 commissions from King James, one giving him authority for the Clove, the other for the whole fleet. No copy of either is known, but they doubtless followed the lines of the commissions for other voyages which are printed in the first letter book. There are minutes of both in the Grant Book, Domestic James I, and the Public Record Office as follows. Public Record Office now is the National Archives, right? Or the National Archives has taken over the work of the Public Record Office. 9th, James, in the reign of James I, 30th of March. I think that's James I, is it? Probably. Jacobus, maybe, James. A commission granted to John Sayers to be captain of the ship called the Clove in a voyage to the East Indies set forth by divers merchants of London with authority to use martial law. 19th of April, a commission granted to John Sayers to be captain of the ships called the Clove, Hector, and Thomas in a voyage to the East Indies, set forth by divers merchants of London, with authority to use martial law. In Saris's diary, he notes that on April 8th, he received the king's commission, and that a week later, the 15th, he received further the king's letters patents for the command of the 3 ships. The letters patents, that would be letters patent, I suppose. It is clear, therefore, that the date of the minute of the second grant is wrong. Probably April 9th or 10th is meant. These commissions were necessary both as authority for the voyage and for the government of the crews, as only thus could men be properly punished for serious crime. 4. Saris's voyage from England to Bantam. It was on April the 18th, 1611, that Saris sailed from the Downs on his venture to the Far East. He had under his command 3 ships, viz. The Clove, the Hector, and the Thomas, of which the first and last were new vessels. They carried crews of 89, 110, and 55 men respectively. And in addition, the Clove and Hector had on board 4 Indians apiece, probably natives of Java, who had been brought to England in the 3rd voyage and were now returning home. The Clove, which was the flagship, was of course under the direct charge of Saris himself, with James Foster as master and Richard Cox as chief merchant. Gabriel Towerson commanded the Hector, with Thomas Fuller as master, while Tempest Peacock was captain and Richard Dawes master of the remaining vessel. That was the Thomas, yes. Saris's narrative divides naturally into 2 distinct portions. The first, dealing with the voyage of the 3 ships from England to Bantam, including their visit to the Red Sea. The second, relating the further venture of the Clove alone to Japan and back to England. Of these, the earlier portion is very detailed and occupies a great portion of the journal, but it is of small interest from a geographical point of view, and its principal incidents, the abortive attempt to open up trade at Mocha and the subsequent wrangles with Sir Henry Middleton over the Indian traders, have already been treated at some length in a former publication of the Society, Voyages of Sir James Lancaster, and in the first volume of Letters Received by the East India Company. It has been considered advisable, therefore, to restrict the text of the present work to the latter half of the voyage, which alone was in any sense a pioneer expedition. Of the earlier portion, the following brief account, taken chiefly from Saris's narrative, as given in Purchas His Pilgrims, Volume 1, pages 334 et seq, and the following, will perhaps be deemed sufficient. The outward voyage was uneventful. The fleet crossed the line on June the 6th, that would be the line of the equator, I think, and reached Table Bay on August the 1st. After a stay of 8 days, the voyage was resumed, but storms and the Agulhas current hindered them to such an extent that it was October 26th before they got as far north as the island of Mohilla in the Comoro group. Though unwilling to lose time, Saris judged it wise to put in here, as many of his men were down with scurvy, and the water casks were running low. The English were well treated by the natives, and before setting sail, November the 3rd, Saris gave the king a letter of commendation to show succeeding visitors, receiving at the same time a note under his hand of friendship. Socotra was sighted on February 16th, 1612, and on the evening of the following day, the fleet anchored in the road of Tamarida. Cox was sent ashore to visit the king, who received him graciously and handed him a letter from Sir Henry Middleton dated September the 1st, 1611, relating his disadventures in the Red Sea by Turkish perfidiae. And here's a rather long note about Middleton, who had anchored at Mocha in November 1610 with the ships of the sixth voyage. The local authorities received him with such apparent cordiality that he was induced to take up his residence on shore with the principal factors and many of the sailors. On the 28th of the month, however, while sitting at his door in the cool of the evening, he was suddenly felled to the ground, bound and carried to prison, and the other Englishmen on shore, about 60 in number, were similarly attacked, 8 of them killed, and the remainder captured and imprisoned. Simultaneously, an attempt was made to surprise the Darling, but in this, fortunately, the Turks were repulsed with loss. After a delay of 3 weeks, Middleton and 34 of his companions were sent up in irons to Sana, the principal town of the province, where the Pasha told them that they had been captured by his orders, as he had received stringent instructions from Constantinople, if any more Englishmen or any other Christians did come into those parts, to confiscate their ships and goods, or to kill or captivate all the men they could get into their power. Fear of the English ships seems, however, to have restrained the Pasha from extreme measures, and some native friends exerted themselves to... Let's be on the next page, hang on, to smooth over matters, with the result that, on February 17, 1611, the captives were permitted to return to Mocha, on the understanding that 30 of their number, including Middleton, should be detained there as hostages until the traders from India had reached that port unmolested. Then they were to be sent on board their ships and take their departure with a warning never again to venture into the forbidden waters. At Mocha, Middleton was well treated, but after waiting 2 months without seeing any sign of the promised release, he determined to make his escape. This was effected by a stratagem on May the 11th, and once on board the Darling, his threats to fire the ships in the road and do my best to batter the town about his ears induced the governor to surrender the rest of the prisoners and to pay 18,000 rials for satisfaction of all our goods and losses sustained. This done, the fleet sailed in the early part of July 1611. Socotra was reached on August the 30th, and 4 days later Middleton sailed for Surat, leaving letters with the king which he promised to deliver to the first English ship that should come there. All right, so let's go back to the main text, since that was a rather long footnote. So that was all about Turkish perfidy, faithlessness of the Turks. There was a letter from Sir Henry Middleton relating the faithlessness of the Turks and warning all succeeding ships not to venture in that direction, as the Pasha of Sana had strict instructions to kill all Christians entering the Red Sea, whether they brought a safe conduct or not. This news placed Saris in a difficulty. He had stringent orders to visit Surat before going on to Bantam, but it would be 6 months before the monsoon would serve for that port, and what was to be done in the meantime? The company had directed that in such a case the ships should go to Aden or Mocha, and for that purpose had procured through the English ambassador at Constantinople a special pass from the Grand Signior, authorizing them to trade in the dominions of Yemen, Aden, and Moha, and the parts adjoining thereunto. But Middleton's experience seemed to show that an attempt in that direction would not only be fruitless, but positively dangerous. In this difficulty, Saris assembled his merchandising council and placed before them 3 alternatives. 1, the fleet to remain at Socotra till the monsoon served for Surat. 2, the Clove to proceed at once to Bantam and Japan, while the remaining... there's a little footnote about the pass. While the remaining vessels waited at Socotra until they could get to Surat. 3, the fleet to go to the Red Sea in spite of Middleton's warning, on the chance that the Grand Signior's pass would procure them a better reception. Saris himself was in favour of the last proposition, and he had little difficulty in persuading his colleagues to take the same view. Accordingly, on March the 1st, the fleet set sail, and on the 16th it passed the straits and anchored in Mocha Road. Road would be the approach to a harbour, in this case, I think. There they learned that the governor who had treated Middleton so badly had been replaced by a Greek renegade who was reported to be more favourable to merchants than his predecessor. Cox and a companion landed and were well received, and a letter promising good treatment was sent on board. Accordingly, on March the 20th, 2 hostages having been received, Saris landed in state and was sumptuously entertained by the governor, to whom he delivered a letter from King James and exhibited the Grand Signior's pass. In view of the near approach of the Indian trading ships, who might fear to venture in unless sure that the English intended them no harm, the local officials were evidently anxious to conciliate the newcomers, and Saris reckoned himself sure of trade and had great hope we might leave a factory, a trading post. These hopes, however, were quickly dissipated by the receipt of a note from Sir Henry Middleton announcing his return to the Red Sea and warning Saris to get his men and goods aboard without delay. Middleton had been repulsed at Surat and had consequently determined to lie in wait for the Indian traders and to force them to exchange their goods for English, we having come so far with commodities fitting their country, nowhere else in India vendable. There's a note about the note 1 here. What was that footnote, which I missed? And a letter promising good treatment was sent on board. 1. Okay. So if we go down, here is the footnote. Purchase gives a translation of the governor's letter, also 3 cuts of seals from a letter of the captain of the galleys and a portion of a communication from the Shabanda of Mocha in the Banyan hand and language. The last mentioned, which by the way is printed upside down, is probably the earliest specimen of Gujarati to be found in an English book. Okay. Right. Continue. Let's just go back to the... Middleton had been repulsed at Surat and had consequently determined to lie in wait for the Indian traders and to force them to exchange their goods for English, we having come so far with commodities fitting their country, nowhere else in India vendable, and further to take some revenge of the great and unsufferable wrongs and injuries done me by the Turks there. As Middleton had already taken some of the Indian vessels and had thus put trade out of the question, Saris had no option but to comply, and on April 12th he weighed and proceeded to the Straits to discuss matters with his former chief. He weighed anchor, that it would be. The conference was a stormy one. Middleton was evidently annoyed at the prospect of having to share his booty with anyone, and he coolly proposed that he should first take what he wanted from the Indian traders and that then Saris should help himself. This proposal Saris refused as unjust and threatened to sail to windward and to intercept some of the vessels then expected, to which Middleton replied angrily that if this were attempted he would sink him without ceremony. In the end, an agreement was arrived at that both fleets should join in capturing Indian ships and in forcibly bartering cargoes with them, sharing in the proportion of 2/3 for the 6th voyage and 1/3 for the 8th voyage. Evidently, Saris still hoped to be allowed trade at Mocha, for, with a view to conciliate the officials there, it was stipulated that the Grand Signor was to have his custom paid, of course at the expense of the unfortunate Indian traders. The Hector and Thomas accordingly joined in the blockade, while Saris returned in the Clove to Mocha to purchase some indigo which had been offered to him. The governor, though aware of the wrongs which were being done to his co-religionists, evinced no hostility to the English and even made some show of buying their commodities. This, however, came to nothing, as also the intended purchase of indigo for which too high a price was asked. And on April 25th, Saris moved over to Assab, where he found Middleton and Towerson with 11 sail of Indian junks. Soon after his arrival, Saris had to face an outbreak on the Hector, due, it would seem, to the dissatisfaction of the men with the victuals supplied. In the course of this mutiny, Thomas Fuller, the master, so far forgot himself as to strike Saris, and had it not been for the firmness and at the same time forbearance displayed by the latter, things would have taken a very serious turn. Fuller was seized and put in irons, and Richard Dawes was transferred from the Thomas to the Hector to take his place, while Richard Roe was promoted to the vacancy in the former vessel. This difficulty surmounted, another presented itself in the shape of a demand by Sir Henry that Saris should not take any calicoes from the Indian ships on the ground that this would enable him to spoil Middleton's market in the eastern seas. Saris, of course, resisted this unreasonable claim, which was thereupon waived. The forced exchange of commodities now went briskly on, the rates both for Indian and English goods being fixed by certain officers representing the 2 voyages. The English wares, it appears, they rated at 100% above cost price, except in the case of ivory, on which only 50% advance was made. while 10 and in some cases 20% profit was allowed on the calicos, etc., taken from the Gujaratis. Meanwhile, Middleton had demanded 100,000 rials from the Mocha officials, in addition to what had already been paid him, as satisfaction for the loss of his men's lives and for the making of him lose his monsoon to the overthrow of his voyage. And he threatened to detain the Indian ships until the amount was paid. This led to a further dispute with Saris, who intimated that as his prospects of peaceful trade at Mocha had been destroyed by Sir Henry's return to the Red Sea, he also must claim compensation, which he thought should take the shape, as in the case of the Indian traders, of 1/3 of what was obtained. This proposal was violently resisted, but in the end, finding himself without remedy, Middleton agreed to let Saris have 1/4 part of the money, leaving the company to settle whether a larger proportion should be paid. But it proved to be easier to decide how the expected sum should be divided when obtained than actually to obtain it. The Turks resolutely refused to pay and were deaf to the suggestion that they could easily recoup themselves by levying a special tax upon the Indian vessels. Middleton was forced, therefore, either to go without or to extort a ransom from his captives. He chose the latter alternative, and from these luckless individuals, already much wronged by the forced exchange of their goods for others they did not want, he demanded 40,000 rials, threatening, unless the money were paid, to carry the ships away with him. The Nakudas wept and implored mercy, but in vain, and at last, finding him inexorable, they compounded for 32,000 rials, 1/4 of which was made over to Saris in accordance with the agreement, and the vessels were then set free. The jealousy of the two commanders was still smouldering, and each was on the watch to forestall the other in the markets of the Far East. As far back as May 19th, Middleton had sent away the Darling, his smallest vessel, with orders to proceed to Priaman in Sumatra and purchase what pepper she found available. Saris replied 4 days later by dispatching the Thomas to the same destination, and on August the 8th the Hector also started for Priaman and Tiku. As soon as he had received his share of the plunder, Saris prepared to follow, and on August 13th he sailed for Bantam. At Socotra he stayed for 5 days to purchase aloes. The voyage was then resumed. Cape Comorin was passed at the end of September, and on October 24th the Clove anchored in Bantam Road, where she found the Hector, which had arrived the previous day. So Bantam Road would be the approach to the harbour, the sea approach. The Thomas came in on November the 18th with a small quantity of pepper obtained at Tiku. The James, another English ship, was already in the road, and more were expected. The result was seen in a great rise in the price of pepper. Saris's needs, however, were urgent, and on October 28th, when a letter from Master William Adams out of Japan was read to all the merchants that they might take notice of the hopes of that country, it was resolved that in regard the Flemings were so strong and almost sole commanders of the Moluccas and Banda, and that the place here is so unhealthful, besides our people dangerously disordering themselves with drink and whores ashore, the Hector should with all speed be dispatched for England, and that 14,000 sacks of pepper should be provided for the lading of her and the Thomas. To look after these matters and to provide a cargo for the Clove on her return from Japan, Saris established a factory ashore under George Camden. So it's a trading outpost, as I repeat. Preparations for the further venture to Japan were rapidly pushed forward, the more so since Middleton, who arrived on November the 9th in the Peppercorn, was believed to be negotiating for the purchase of a ship with the intention of forestalling Saris. To fill the gaps which death had made in his crew, the latter recruited 5 Englishmen whom he found at Bantam. Later on, he engaged a Swart named Francisco, 2 foreigners named Fernando and Mendez, and 1 Hernando Jimenez, a Spaniard, speaking the Malaya tongue very perfect. He had also to pacify his sailors, who were again complaining of their food, alleging that he stinted them to purchase himself a good conceit of the company by sparing of their purses. Perhaps it was with a view of rebutting this calumny that he was so careful, as the text will show, to note each day what victuals were issued to the men. At last all matters were satisfactorily settled, and Saris was ready to proceed. He waited only to see his other 2 vessels safely dispatched to England. Their ladings having been completed, the Hector set sail on December the 11th, 1612, with orders to wait at the watering place for the Thomas, and on January the 12th, 1613, her consort followed her. Consort, that is. Saris had previously ordered 4 whole culverin out of the Hector and 2 sakers out of the Thomas to be brought aboard the Clove, understanding by a Fleming which came lately from Japan that it was one of the requested commodities they carried thither, and chief cause of obtaining the settling of a factory there, being a matter was at their first arrival inquired for. Thus provided, on January the 15th, 1613, Saris left Bantam Road on his voyage to the Moluccas and Japan. And I think that is a good moment to stop. I will continue on later. Yeah, the English is interesting because the spelling is obviously quite different in many respects to modern spelling. But I think once you get the hang of how to read it, for example, I think a U is normally a V, or is it vice versa, and so on and so forth, then things become a little bit more clear and easier to read. So what are we talking about? The late 16th century English at the moment, at this point. So we're not sort of in the realms of Chaucer, for example. One that April with the show the socht and all that kind of jazz. Chaucer and all that. So anyway, thank you very much for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.